Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Every Wednesday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock, I get to say whatever I want, so it's a great time. It's time to talk about some of the things that are happening in the world, some of the issues financially and economically that are impacting you here in Stewart. And so one of the things, of course, that is a significant financial and economic impact right now is all of the looting and the things that are going on around the country. And the reason I mention that is not because it's just in the news, but economically, if you think about it a minute, we've been talking about how we're having a hard time with this economic recovery, and especially small business. And they're trying to do something from a PPP standpoint. That's the payroll protection program, and they're trying to do something from the economic impact disaster loan program, which, as many of you may or may not know, is been completely changed and is slowed down. And so small business was struggling to start with to get through this next few weeks, trying to reopen, and now in some places, those businesses are being impacted pretty significantly, it's making a big difference. And of course, we've got some of these. It's interesting that a lot of this damage is affecting large stores more maybe even than some of the mom and pops, but it is definitely affecting the large big box places. And of course, some of those have already filed for bankruptcy. And then, of course, some of the small places in the community, these community-based businesses, they have, like all of us that are small business owners, we have our life savings tied up in those businesses, and to get it destroyed like that, many people don't have the financial wherewithal right now to come back. They can't borrow the money. There's no access to loans in terms of that type of lending potentially. So it's going to be it's kind of interesting from a financial standpoint to look at what impact this may have on what was just starting to be recovery. Is this enough to just to stall the recovery enough to cause a problem? It's all timing right now, and that's the issue. It's all timing. We've got we've got the payroll protection program money that came out. It was delayed in really getting out to some people, although in the whole scheme of things, I'm amazed at how rapidly it got deployed. But still, it was slow getting out there. The way it's structured, most small businesses, small partnerships, or LLCs taxed as partnerships, and some small self-employed people, they got hurt by how the thing was structured. They really couldn't get the same money that everybody else got, and so, or at least get it forgiven. They may have gotten money, but they couldn't get it forgiven. The SBA changed all the terms on that. I'm amazed sometimes when I hear what's going on with some of these programs on the news, and then I see what's actually happening to them. And it's just I can't believe that they're they're talking about the same thing. For many of you that may know that the program was these things were structured to try to provide some immediate injection of cash to business, and particularly small business, because it creates the jobs. But what the government forgot is that some of the jobs that small business creates are their own. I mean, a lot of small businesses, they are self-employed. They are generating income for themselves. So the way that the SBA is treating it is, if you don't have employees, if you don't have somebody other than yourself, tough luck. You're out of luck. Well, that's a lot of businesses. And when this stuff first rolled out, and they talked about 30 million businesses out there that were potentially eligible, but we'd had less than 2 billion that had applied. My thought was, wow, why is it taking so long? And then I realized that, first of all, many of them were sole proprietors or self-employed people who couldn't apply until the 10th of April instead of the 3rd. They had to wait an extra week anyway. By then, remember, the announcement came out that they had run out of money on the PPP side. And then when they did re-up it and the people got back in, it was still a situation where they then limited. They came out with a new guidance. I love these interim final rules. I wish they'd have a final rule that would actually, maybe do something that the law said it was supposed to, which, by the way, for those of you who are maybe not in business or maybe aren't dealing with this stuff directly and maybe aren't familiar, and all you do here is, this is such a successful program. We've rolled this thing out and, it's saved a bunch of small businesses and all that. Listen, I'm as much a fan of what, the president tried to do as anybody. But the fact of the matter is, it didn't work. It didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is because, I hate to say it, because you got to drain the swamp first. I mean, the fact of the matter of what's going on with this stuff is all about high-level bureaucrats changing the law, deciding what is going to happen. I don't know if Mnuchin understands that, if he's in the weeds enough to understand all of that, or if he's just taking what normally a Treasury Secretary would, an overall policy view. But somebody needs to get in there and see that the administration at the SBA and at the upper levels of this thing, on the disaster side and on the PPP side, they just blew this thing. And they interpreted the law. And many times their interpretation was exactly the opposite of what the law said. For example, right now this isn't the SBA, this is the IRS, but it's under the same purview. Let's face it, the Treasury Department, the U.S. Treasury controls the IRS and it controls the SBA. So both of these things are under the same purview. And yet they've come out with these rules that, the law basically said that when this PPP loan was forgiven, it's not supposed to be income. So that's pretty clear to me. It's not supposed to be income. It's not supposed to be covered like it normally would be, and it's not supposed to be income. So just to explain how that works, if you have a loan and you go to your creditor and you say, I have a loan, I can't pay it, or I have a loan, I don't want to pay it, or whatever, and that lender says, okay, you owe me $100,000, I will forgive that loan. You don't have to pay me the $100,000. Right? Well, that's great. You got off of $100,000 of debt to your creditor, right? But you now have $30,000 worth of debt to the U.S. government, to the IRS. Why? Because that $100,000 is now income to you. You say, well, wait a minute, I didn't get any money. How can this be income? Well, because they're arguing that you got a benefit of it previously because you spent that money previously, and you got a benefit of it that you may have gotten a tax deduction for. And so therefore, now when you get it forgiven, it's income to you because you got tax-free income to use for, you shouldn't have gotten deductions for the previous deductions. That is what normally happens. The tax or the bill that was written for this loan, for these loans, specifically said, no, that won't occur. That's not supposed to happen. It isn't. It will not be income under the normal forgiveness guidelines. Seems pretty clear, right? Yet the IRS a month ago, who comes up with this stuff? The IRS a month ago decided, nothing in the law. Now IRS has a lot of authority. And a lot of people are afraid of them. But the IRS came out and said, yeah, the loan forgiveness is an income, but any of the expenses that you used to get the loan forgiven, i.e. your payroll that you're paying, is not deductible. So what's happening right now is that business is taking this money and it's giving it to the employees. And that's really what's happening. The federal government's giving it to the business to turn around and give to the employees. That's the way they've tried to structure this thing, so that the money basically goes directly to the employees. The owner of the business doesn't get a benefit from it. frankly, even some of the small expenses that they have, a lot of small businesses either don't have those expenses or are not structured in a position that they can deduct those expenses easily. So they don't get some of that stuff. They actually excluded benefits to owners in some of this. So some of these items, if you're an owner employee or an owner, a partner, or sole proprietor, you're not getting those some of those other expenses that you would hope to be able to spend that money on. You don't get it as a forgiveness item. So what's happening is these businesses are getting this money, they're passing it along, and they're using it to support their staff who are working, probably not doing a ton of work, but they're working. And I say that not because people are lazy, but because the businesses aren't open at full capacity. So they're not doing full jobs. I know a lot of businesses that have brought their staff back as a result of the PPP. They've brought their staff back when they need about half the people that they've got, but they're doing it because they're wanting to be good players. They want to get the loan forgiven. They're getting the money out to the people. But what's happened with that program is it's all become, the PPP program has all become about the government has taken small business, and they said to small business, which again creates most of these jobs, here, take this money. You don't get to keep any of it. Or if you do get to keep some, it's the same as what you took in 2019, which could have been a whole different set of circumstances, right? So you get to keep it, maybe no more than what you made last year. Even though maybe this year your expenses are much higher because you've had to support the business more. Can't do that. Can't pay yourself back. You can't give yourself money. You can't loan yourself some of this money to use it to pay for other stuff. So what's happening? So the government's put small business again in a position that they just are funneling money from one to another, taking the place of the unemployment office, and yet not getting any benefit from it. They don't even get to deduct the expenses that they're incurring, the labor expenses that they're incurring to keep to do that, to keep things going and to make this whole thing work. And keep in mind, this isn't free. Yeah, the loan might get forgiven, but what is not included in the loan is the money the business is paying for Social Security. So even if the business transfers all of their money to the employees and does that, and the employees, the way it's set up, they will get their Social Security paid for. They get their federal income tax paid for. All of that will come out of that number, just like it all used to. Their retirement benefits, their health benefits, all of that are included, right? But the business still has to pay the Social Security and Medicare tax, which is 7.65%. So it's costing the business 7.65% off the top on this thing, to pay that. So they've got that. They've got federal unemployment that they've got to pay. If they've got workers' comp, they've got workers' comp that they've got to pay. They don't get reimbursed for that. So there's items out there that they're having to pay that they're not getting reimbursed for. And so, and of course, some of the businesses are trying to continue to work just at a lesser capacity. So what's happening is that income that they're making now, which, is really being chewed up by labor and rent and all those other things, is going to create a situation where they're going to pay some tax because they got forgiven on their PPP loan. So this thing was messed up from the standpoint of how it was implemented. It was not messed up from the way it was written. I mean, when you really think about trying to move this much money into the private sector this quickly, it was really a pretty well thought out program from that standpoint. What it failed to take into consideration, it was being implemented by government, not by private business. And if I have, if there's a problem with President Trump, it is that he does not fully understand how bad the swamp is, how entrenched these people are. Because here's the thing. If I work for the SBA, I really don't care if you get your money because I want to maintain my job. I'm 6 years from retirement. I've got a pension. I've got health benefits. I want to keep my job. And you're saying, well, you're going to keep your job because you're doing this good thing. No, I'm not, because some administration is going to come after President Trump and second guess what happened. They're going to say, you should have done more, or you should have done less, or you should have done whatever. And so that SBA person is following the book. They want to be at a point where they're saying, you know what? You can't get me. I did exactly what I was told. See here, line 3 in section 2 of this handbook you gave me. I did that, so I'm okay. See, check that off. I did that. Well, yeah, but that's not what we were supposed to. Well, I don't care. I did that. That's what I'm supposed to do. And that is what has happened in the bureaucracy of government. When government gets that large, it can't implement something like this. It is just impossible. There's too much waste. There's too much inertia, and there's too much backsliding. It's just not possible, because down the road, down the aisle, down the organizational chart, those people want to stay employed. They only care about the job. It is a good job. It pays a lot of money, and they want to keep it. I'm not faulting it. Anybody that took the job, they took it, and I understand that. But, you have to understand, people have to understand, the government has to understand, that person is more worried about preserving their job than they are about preserving your job. And that is what's causing this problem. You know that on the economic impact disaster loan, now that is the main program here. That is the main money that is designed to protect you. The money can be spent on anything for working capital purposes. You can buy inventory with it. You can help, cover your receivables. You can help pay for, equipment that you might need. You can pay for interest on working capital lines. You can pay for all kinds of things. You can pay for labor, as long as it's not the same labor you use the PPP money for. You can pay your own labor on it. This was the loan that was the big loan that was supposed to get everybody through. You could borrow up to $2 million, and you had 30 years to pay it back at 3.75% interest. So it was a large amount of money. It was based on your total gross profit, which gross profit is your total sales less your total costs of your sales, like your materials and all those kind of things, less labor. You didn't have to include labor in it. So you took your total sales, took your total materials costs, and whatever was left, that's called gross profit. And you took that for a year and you got half of that. So let's say my sales for the year are $1 million, which is not huge let's say I've got $1 million sales, and let's say my cost of sales without labor is about $300,000, right? So I got $1 million, $300,000 of the cost of sales. My gross profit is $700,000. They were going to send you $350,000. All right. Now, that number applied up to a $2 million total. So if I had $5 million worth of sales and I had $1 million worth of cost of sales, I have $4 million gross profit. They're going to pay me $2 million of that. Now, what the SBA originally did is you had to show that you had a loss, that you actually needed that money because you had a loss. But they waived that, and what they were doing is giving you up to $500,000. If you qualified for more than $500,000, they were giving you up to $500,000, and you did not have to show loss. That's a good thing, because you can't. Most small businesses would have difficulty showing loss now. They'll probably be able to show loss a couple years from now, but they would have a very hard time showing loss now, and that's what you'd have to do. So, because some of those businesses, the money hasn't stopped yet. They still are collecting prior receivables, their cash basis. They've got money coming in. It's just starting. And it may even be as much as it used to be. In fact, one of the really funny things about a depression or a recession, like we had even in 2007 and 2008, is many businesses didn't feel it in 2007 and 2008 because they had cash coming in. They had already done bit work. People owed them money. People were paying the money. Even it was a little slow, but they were paying money. And what was happening is the business was getting paid on stuff that they'd done. They weren't having to pay money out on new work because they didn't have any. The work had stopped, particularly in the construction industry. The work had stopped. So now you don't have to pay labor because you laid those people off. You don't have to pay materials because you're not buying anything because you're not building anything. So what happens in a lot of these recessions, and why small business gets blindsided by it most times, is that they don't see it until it's really way into it, because they've used up their internal capital. Their business had a bunch of money invested in it that they had invested over the years, in infrastructure, in receivables, in inventory, whatever. And they as the business cycle slowed down, as the businesses themselves slowed down, they were pulling that cash out of the business, really not even realizing they were doing it. They were just pulling it out like they normally would have, but there was no money coming back in, and that's what, and that's what's happened, and that's what's happening right now in the economy. There's still a lot of money coming in, but what's happening is the jobs on the table are less and less, and what's happening down the road is some of those jobs are going to fall out. So right now they're booked, and everybody thinks, oh, good, this is a good thing. But what's going to happen, for example, a month from now, when somebody goes out to borrow some money to improve their commercial property, and the market says, we're not loaning money on commercial real estate because we don't think it's a good investment right now. Well, then that job is going to fall out. The maintenance people that commercial real estate hires, their landscape people, their fire sprinkler people, all of those people are going to lose, they're going to lose their jobs, or they're going to have a loss of income. That they don't even see that yet, because that hasn't happened yet, but it is going to happen, because the motion has already been started. From a financial standpoint, there's no money out there for any of those projects. So you get some of these projects. I was sitting down, sitting out there in downtown at CRB meeting last night, and watching some of the stuff. And there was a project. It was a small project. It was a person that's been in town for years and years and years. Actually, his family's been here since late 1800s, so they've been around a long time. And was asking to develop a relatively small piece of property, right? And so, you're talking about, trying to do, maybe one more unit. Well, so doing 7 versus 6, and I understand the people in the neighborhood saying, we don't want this, we don't want that, and I understand all of that. But what people don't understand is, when you ask a person to make a change, let's say do 6 units instead of 7 units. Well, that 7th unit may have been what it took to make that viable. And so, I know that what's going to happen there potentially is that small, not really even a developer, a community person, that small person, community builder is going to just say, you know what, I'll just sit on this. I don't need to do this right now. There's too much stuff going on. I'm using up my own capital. Maybe I'll keep it. I don't know what's going to happen out there right now. So maybe I'll, just postpone this. And it's the same thing with a couple other projects. There was a beautification project, and, they're talking about, using the money to replace windows. Okay. And should we replace windows or not replace windows? And, all of this kind of thing, which, I understand is, government giving private business money, there's going to be winners and losers. That's the problem. And there's not supposed to be. Government isn't supposed to be picking and choosing, but that's what's going to happen. Some owner is going to get to take advantage of that. Some owner isn't. And, this guy wins, this guy loses because they paid out of pocket, and that's what government does. It actually, it was amazing to sit there and watch it in process, but everything they talked about at the CRB meeting was largely taking money from some and giving it to others, because all of those things, all of them have an economic impact. They all have an impact, and there are very few win-wins. There's a win-win maybe for the city, but there's not a win-win for the property owner. Somebody loses when the city selects somebody else right next door to win. That's just the way the process works. And there was an old house that that one of the owners was asking for some windows on, right? So it was now this house has been, I don't know, it's been around since 30 or 20 or 40, I don't know, somewhere in the early 1900s. It is definitely one of the few places left. It's downtown, east of town, and they already had storm shutters on. They've already done that, and they were wanting to put impact windows on to make the property look a little bit more like it used to look, and maybe make it look a little bit more like it was historically, but at the same time, just to preserve the property. Now, if you haven't been involved in the preservation of historic property, you don't know how hard that is. And I will tell you, every single piece of historic property, if it came down to economics, would not be saved, because it is a whole lot cheaper to tear the thing down and start from scratch than to preserve it. When you're taking a building that was built by hand with Dade County pine that you can't find right now, it's very difficult to find, and you're talking about cypress, Pecky cypress, and you're talking about houses that aren't on foundations. They're up on, they're up off the ground. They have a crawl space. The plumbing is old. Outside, the electric has to be upgraded. It potentially has to be completely rewired. And now you're talking about rewiring on a retrofit, not wiring it at the beginning when you're building it from scratch. You're talking about going in, taking down walls or parts of walls, running the electric through it, making sure that there's conduit and everything, is because these are old buildings that can also catch on fire. You've got termites that are going to potentially be in there. You've got asbestos siding that was used in those days. You've got all of this stuff. If I'm a builder, if I'm an owner of that property, why do I save that? If economically, why do I save that? If it costs me, if my house downtown is worth $250 a square foot, let's say it's worth $250 a square foot, and I have 1,000 square feet, right? So that's $250,000 is what my property is worth. It cost me, maybe, let's say right now it's going to cost $150 a square foot to build. So if I build 1,000 square feet downtown, and it's going to cost me $150,000 to do that, and I, it's worth 250. So, I got $100,000 profit in the deal. But now I'm going to take a historic house that, is already constructed, but is not at code. It doesn't have proper windows. It doesn't have proper electric, has termite damage, has asbestos. So what's that going to cost me? Well, by the time I get in there and actually find out, first of all, how much it's going to cost me, which by then I've committed. Now I've already committed. So I may risk $50,000 just to find out that it's going to cost me $200,000 to repair that house. And so now all of a sudden, I can't make that work. I've got too big of a risk. If it turns out I've got no money in that house. I mean, I'm borrowed to the hilt on that house at that point, or I've wasted money. I've got no profit in the house when I could have just torn the house down and built something from scratch for $150,000, and it would have been brand new with brand new utilities and all this kind of stuff. So, economically, here's, those are the kind of things that you're looking at, and those are just facts. It's not so what, like I said, for historic property, there has to be some incentive to save it, because in most cases, it's not going to be saved. If you try to get it as a historic preservation, then the cost of maintaining it is going to be outrageous. You have to follow all kinds of requirements in terms of maintaining the look of that property. And at that point, that's very, very expensive. And you can't make changes that might make that house economically more beneficial. For example, adding a bedroom might not be something you could do, or tearing it down, or tearing the roof off and putting a second story on there. You may not be able to do that if you have a historic preservation. For example, the Victorian, the Thomas House that's up here on the corner of Joan Jefferson and Albany, that house is, is 1902, I think. I know last night they talked about it and saying it was like 1925 or now, but that may have been when it was finalized, maybe when the uh, woodworking shop was built. But I think the original house was the third house in Stewart, built in the late 1800s. Started, it was a single story at that point, then it was added on and added on. Probably by 20s, but I think by 1902 or 3 it was completely finished. So again, one of the original houses in Stewart. I mean, the founding people in Stewart. In fact, before it was Stewart, it was Potsdam. So it was actually prior to Stewart it was built. So you look at something like that as you say, that's not real old in the scheme of things in the United States. That's there's houses in Boston built in the 1600s, 1500s, or whatever, 1600s. So those are all old houses, right? But this is old for Stewart. Should we save something like that? Sure. But do we? It's sitting on $1 million piece of property. I mean, you can tear it down and build a 3-story building on it, and it's worth a fortune. So what's the incentive to keep that? Now, you could get it on the historic registry, but if you get it on the historic registry, then you have to maintain it just like it is. I'm not even sure you could move it. If you do move it, where are you going to move it to? You're going to have to chop it up to do that. So I guess what I'm saying is I was kind of making a point that there's a lot of things economically that don't make sense. And people do things that make economic sense normally. They don't do it out of some altruistic outlook most of the time. They're doing it for some very specific purpose. And like I say, historic is very difficult. You have to have a love to save historic. If you don't, it's costing you a lot of money. It's costing you a lot of money anyway, but you're wasting money. You're not going to do that if you don't care about it. So my point was that there was a project there, and they're debating whether or not they should give this person the ability to do that. So, and it was a $10,000 grant, right? So it's a $10,000 grant. The cost of doing the work is going to be $20,000. 21. So, they're spending half of the improvements, but then they decide that they want trees on the property. Well, I understand that, we want shade in Stewart, but, it's kind of funny because, they suggest, well, go ahead and put 4 trees, the 12-foot tall, 4 12-foot tall trees with a canopy. All right. Now they're going to put it on the street where they just tore the other ones out because of utility issues and electric issues. But they're going to make the landowner put it back in, the stuff that the city took out. So that I thought was kind of hilarious. But then this person is asking for a $10,000 grant, of which they're only going to be, now they got to buy trees. The city's not going to provide the trees. Now, if the city wanted to provide the trees, fine. They took them out. They should provide them. But that's not what they were talking about. They wanted him to use the grant money to do that. So now he's got a $20,000 project that he just added about $4,000 or $5,000 to do to all these trees. Because it's not like you're putting a little stick in the ground. You're putting a 12-foot tree in. So depending upon what you're putting in, those can be relatively expensive. Buying them, maintaining them, putting them in and making sure they take off, all of those kind of things. Getting approval, taking care of utilities, and all of the things that have to be, looked out for. And so now here's a person that wants to preserve a historic property, is asking to put on some impact. They already have hurricane shutters on it, so it's not that they're looking for some protection of it, which I think they should be entitled to anyway. But all they're asking is to replace the windows, which are the original wood windows, right? So, but they're going to get $10,000 to do that on a $20,000 project that the CRB just added, $4,000 to, which has got to come out of their grant. So now to do the $21,000 worth of windows, the city's going to give them $6,000. I mean, come on. At some point, they're just going to say, the heck with it. I won't do it. I don't have to do it. So I'm not going to do it. I've got hurricane shutters. I don't need anything more. I'll just let it go. You know what? If that thing deteriorates, falls apart, I'll either make a decision at that time to tear the place down, or I'll just sell out and get out of it, let somebody else deal with it. And then that person will tear it down. And that is happening consistently. You look at the property up here in Stewart that the apartments were built on, New Urban. Now, New Urban's a good developer. It's a great project. But in the process, there was an old building on that property, the old Walton building, and they didn't want that. It doesn't fit in their plan. They're not going to take a building that was built in 1935 and that's 450 square feet and leave it on their site. They're not going to do that. They have no use for it. So what happens to that building? Well, it gets torn down. Well, you know what? That building is one of the few buildings that's a commercial building that was west of the tracks. It was the first business west of the tracks in Stewart. The person that built it, Walton, was a contractor. He was the contractor for the Lyric Theater. He's the guy that actually built the Lyric Theater. He built that building as his construction office to build the Lyric Theater. Now, if I'm looking at it financially, what can I do with a 450-foot building on a 1 acre site that I'm going to put a 1.5 acre site that I'm going to put, a bunch of 48 apartments on? I don't have any room for that building. It doesn't make any sense. I understand. It's cheaper to build those apartments than it is to do something and move or renovate that building. But the point is, those properties just go away. If a city isn't focused on that, if they aren't at least keeping an eye on historic preservation, there will not be any historic items preserved. Now, some people can say that's okay. We don't care. What does that add to the city? We don't care that the Walt building gets torn down. We don't care that that old house on east of town gets torn down. We don't really care about that. And that's probably true. There's a lot of people that really don't. And they're probably looking at, why should the city spend money on that? Well, I tell you what, if the city's going to spend money, I'd rather see them help preserve some of the history of the city than giving private owners the ability to put something on their property or build additional parking spaces or whatever. I'd like to see them at least, maintain and preserve. Now, if doing that, if spending money on those things helps some property owner be able to maintain their historic property, that's fine. But, in our town right now, in Stewart right now, the only people who are actively out there, we had some people previously prior to the recession in 2008 and 2007 that were out there trying to do some of this, and they ultimately ended up having to tear stuff down. I remember a couple that, a group of guys I know real well over in the Fraser Creek Edition bought a property over there, had an old house on it that had been built in the 20s. And they were absolutely going to try to save it. And they got in there, and by the time they were going to have to replace a lot of stuff because of some damage, they were going to have to rebuild. They were going to have to do some stuff on the second floor loft area. They're going to have to tear all the inside out to put in new electric, and bring it up to code. They were going to have to do a lot of stuff with plumbing. By the time they were done with that, they were going to have a couple $100,000 and some $1,000 into the improvement. So, at that point, they had no choice. They had to tear it down. And that's what's happening around town, is that more and more of these properties, they're very hard to maintain. You can't get the money to maintain them a lot of times because some of the maintenance is above and beyond reasonable cost. So nobody's going to lend you money to do it. You have to do it out of pocket. And, and it gets very difficult to do that and to maintain that. And so ultimately what happens is, over a period of time, there's deterioration, so that when that house has to be moved, because that's what's going to happen, it's going to end up being torn down, or it's generally going to be torn down. So what's happened is that there's a few people in town that have been doing that. The big ones are the Vitales. They, with the old Colorado Inn. If we didn't have the old Colorado Inn in town, and that's a business I would hate to lose, because they've preserved more historic property and used it for economic purposes, more historic property than anybody in town. I think they've done more to preserve the way we are than anybody. And it's, it's amazing, and they're out there still trying to do it, but that gets expensive. $1 million piece of property, moving property from, getting barges and moving property around. That's an expensive proposition. And then furthermore, there's fewer and fewer places in downtown Stewart that you can actually move those historic houses to, or those historic properties. So, ultimately, that whole that whole process is very, very expensive. And I've spent some time on that this morning because we're coming up, I think, at some point here where I think we're at I think we're at National Historic Preservation Month or something. But I just wanted to mention that we've got a lot of stuff that's going on, and there's going to be a lot of things economically that are happening as a result of this recession. And the question is, government is going to have to make a decision what they're going to try to preserve and who they're going to help, because there's not enough money to help everybody. And we saw that with the PPP and the EIDL. And even if there was enough money, and even if you said that you need to get the money, there's not enough. Administratively, it's impossible to get the money out in the time frame that's necessary. And like I said, the further away you get, federal government, for example, and you look to the federal government, the more restrictive it is, the more difficult it is to get it to the people, and the more waste that occurs, and the more bureaucracy that makes sure that it doesn't happen, or at least doesn't happen the way it's intended. Why? Because bureaucrats don't fully understand. And this isn't, I'm not saying this, from a mean standpoint. This isn't their job. You'd think it is, but it isn't. So when I go to the planning department at the county or whatever, that planning person's job is not to help me figure out how best economically to build my project. No, their job is to sit there and say to you, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And it becomes very, very cumbersome. So at some point, you can't do that yourself. So you have to hire somebody to help you do that. And then the next thing you know, you've incurred, a fair amount of time and costs. And that's where I think government doesn't recognize, the cost of things. As a CPA that represents people all the time, I realize what it costs a client if I have to spend 2 hours on the phone trying to get a hold of the IRS because you can't get through to anybody because their phone system doesn't work, right? Does the IRS understand how much it costs? No, they have no clue. Their answer is, well, let the taxpayer call. We'll help the taxpayer has nothing to be afraid of. Yeah, they're not afraid of you. They just don't know what the heck you're asking them to do, because they have no idea what the tax code says. It's way beyond their comprehension on a lot of things. It's just too complicated. And so they don't know what to ask. You can ask them a question, and they don't know whether they're giving you an answer that's going to cause them to, owe more money, or that, they're not trying to cheat. They just might make a mistake, and that mistake could cost them money. So, so this whole concept of, the bureaucracy of government just does not understand what costs the private enterprise has to incur because of that bureaucracy. Yeah, like I say, this meeting the other, and I'm not picking on the CRB. Actually, our CRB board in Stewart is a very good board, and they have people on there that have done some construction work and building and in the real estate business and things like that. So I'm just saying it's not part of their thought process, and the staff for the city, it's not part of their thought process. So when you go down there and you look at something, and the city says, like they did to this one person who'd been around since, his family had been around since the late 1800s, is, well, just go ahead and apply for a certain type of PUD. And, okay, just go ahead and do a PUD. Well, this guy's doing a project. He's supposed to go out and hire, a land planner and an architect to help him structure a PUD application. Yeah, these guys in the city, they work with it all the time, but they don't understand. I mean, who's going to do that? That means you got to hire somebody to do that. So you just added $15,000 to your project. Well, if this is a $300,000 project, or maybe that's, you're not even going to make that on the project, $300,000, and you just added 15, you just took away 5% of the profit on the deal. So it's kind of they don't think like that. The bureaucracy doesn't think like that. It's just, here's what we need to do. And so, I just, it's sad because that same bureaucracy at the federal level, which is much more, the good thing about the meeting at the local level here at the city is that there were people that could go there, the applicants, the community, they all got to speak. They all got to be heard, and they were heard. So at least the decision that was made by the CRB was made with input and generally was in favor of what the citizens that were there wanted. But it doesn't mean that that's what, it's still a bureaucracy that included a lot of costs that shouldn't be, really shouldn't be necessary. And unfortunately just encumber and ultimately restrict or hurt the ability to, preserve or develop the property and steward the way it should be. So it's the same thing with the SBA. It's impossible, to get some of this stuff resolved because it's Washington, and you've got to get to the right person, and you got to get something done. And, and that's what I'm dealing with right now, trying to clean some of that up. But we've got economic impact development loans that are supposed to be out there to help you with this disaster. Those loans went into effect at the end of March. You could apply for those loans right at the end of March, actually a little earlier, but technically right at the end of March. I have people who applied right away, March 30th, March 31st. Their application number is 75,000. They still haven't been funded. There's 75,000 and they still haven't been, there's nothing wrong. They just haven't been funded. Yet I have, between then and April, say 10th, there are another 3 million applications. So we've got 4 million people that have applied for money, and less than 80,000 of them have got the money. And that's just bureaucracy. It isn't going to happen. They didn't have the people. They've changed the program. The only reason I got the money out right now, they've gone to everybody and they've said, that 2 million we were going to give you, well, we're not giving it to you. We're giving you 150,000 max. But wait, that's like 1 month. Well, it doesn't make a difference. We're going to give you, well, you know what? They should say we're not going to give you any, because 150,000 when you need 500,000 is like cutting somebody's arm and just seeing how long it'll take them to bleed to death. If I cut it really deep, they might go quick. But if I cut it just a little deep, then maybe they'll last another 2 months, and I can say, well, I saved that business. It just didn't make it past the reopening phase. Well, yeah, it's because you didn't give it enough money to get past the reopening phase. All of these businesses could be successful if that EIDL money had gotten out there. The interesting thing is that EIDL money cost the government nothing. It actually made the government money, because they would make a loan, a government would make a loan to a business at 3.75% for 30 years. They would turn around and sell that loan to the pension plans and the IRA accounts, and those people would buy it at a premium. In other words, if that was $1 million loan, they would pay you $1.1 million for it. So you would make $100,000 by selling that loan off. Actually, probably a little more than that, but $1 million, you'd make $100,000. So the government was actually making money. Every one of those loans they put out there, they made, and yet they couldn't get them out there. And everybody's going to wonder why the program failed. Well, the program failed because of the bureaucracy of government. And you should have been able to see that, I think, at the beginning. But most of us didn't see it because we were more wrapped up in just trying to survive. So anyway, I'm a little discouraged by all of that, because it just isn't happening fast enough. And as I see one more business close, it's very, very discouraging, to see that happening. So anyway, keep an eye out there. If you can help out with your local businesses, realize that it's a tough time for them, and do what you can to help them out. I appreciate you listening. We're going to talk a little bit more about what's going on with some of this stuff next week. I got off a little bit on historical stuff, but we'll be back here next Wednesday at 9 o'clock right on WSTU Digital 1450, or Martin County's Heritage Station.